the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 20, looking at the groups and teams of the 2023 African Cup, played in Ivory Coast in January 2024. This episode is looking at Group D: Algeria, Burkina Faso, Mauritania, and Angola. Here we go. It's the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada, Series 20. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor. And today we are looking at Group D for the African Cup 2023 tournament. This group includes Algeria, Burkina Faso, Mauritania, and Angola.
Yeah, and we usually give some information about our past, present, and future media casts at this point. If you want that, we'll direct you to the video on our YouTube homepage, which covers that information, and the address is also on the screen. And for listeners, we recommend the show notes, and you can find a bunch of stuff there.
That's right. For now, we'll just say that we're currently focused on the 2023 Asian and African Cups. Both are being played in January 2024. And we're producing this group and team series as well as a player series for each.
That's right. Okay, but we won't spend too much time on that. Let's get on with it.
Yeah, so this series previews the groups and teams for African Cup 2023, which confusingly takes place in January 2024. And we're changing our usual format here because we did a full series for the 2021 African Cup, which is played in January 2022.
Yeah, so there we did the usual overviews of World and African Cup histories, as well as looking at each team's local history. And that series featured a deep dive into the team's history in the African Cup finals. And it also examined the recent history of the teams.
We think it's too much to repeat that information every 2 years. So in this series, we're only going to do that for teams that were not involved in the 2021 African Cup. And for those that were, we'll provide links and even times in the show notes so that it can be easily reviewed.
Yeah, so in this series, for teams that were covered in the 2021 African Cup, we're just going to give a summary of their history as well as the recent history as we usually do.
Yeah, so let's look at the three sections of this media cast in outline.
Right, and before we do that, I'll just point out that Angola is the only team here that wasn't in the African Cup. Anyway, the three sections. So in part one, we're going to introduce the teams in the group, actually the countries in the group, and give the location and population of each.
Yeah, for part two, we'll do an overview of each team's history and recent form. So as we said, we'll just do a summary for the teams that were in the previous African Cup with links in the show notes to the full version done in 2021. And then for the teams that weren't covered, which is Angola here, we will give an overview of their world, regional, and local cup histories with a deep dive into their history in the African Cup finals.
That's right. And then part three will be a comparison of the teams in rankings and head-to-head records. Unfortunately, we don't have any odds yet. We're too far out. So we'll have to skip that, but we will end with a discussion of the prospects of the teams and our predictions.
All right. Should we get on with part one?
Well, I was debating between green and red here. I probably should have gone green because we have three teams. Wait, we have three teams with green, three teams with red. I dressed properly. I think you got the green kind of covered.
I've got the green covered enough, so we'll go with that. Green and red, the theme.
It is. That's right. There's also yellow in the three teams. I think we should have prepared a little better. Anyway, let's get on with it by introducing the countries, beginning with Algeria.
Yeah, Algeria, their soccer nickname is the Desert Foxes, and their population is 45.6 million, which is 10th largest in Africa. And Algeria is a large country in Northwest Africa that borders the Mediterranean Sea, but is largely filled by the Sahara Desert. And Algeria is, in fact, the largest country in Africa in terms of land area.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, the next country is Burkina Faso.
Yes, Burkina Faso, their nickname is the Stallions. Their population is 23.3 million people, and it's a small to medium-sized country on the southern end of the Sahara, and it's landlocked, but it borders host country Ivory Coast to the southwest.
All right. Next is Mauritania.
Mauritania, their nickname is the Lions of Chinguetti. Their population is 4.8 million, and it's a decently large country in the Western Sahara with a border on the Atlantic Ocean. And like Algeria, who it actually borders, it is mostly desert.
All right. And finally, Angola.
Yes, Angola, their nickname is the Black Antelopes. Angola has 36.7 million people, so one of the larger countries in Africa. And it's a large country in southwestern Africa with a long coastline on the Atlantic Ocean. And it's bordered to the north by the Democratic Republic of Congo, to the east by Zambia, and Namibia to the south.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a lot of numbers. So we usually do a little comparison of the teams here. So maybe we'll run through the numbers again and just see their size relative to each other.
Yeah, so the largest country is Algeria with 45.6 million people.
Oh, sorry there, Connor. I got lost in my graphics, but I can bring it back in.
All right.
At 46.5.
Yeah. Next, we have Angola at 36.7. So about 10 million people fewer for Angola.
All right, 36.7.
After that is Burkina Faso with 23.3 million people. So still a large enough country.
That's right, almost exactly half the size of Algeria there.
Yeah, and then finally, Mauritania is the smallest country in terms of population at just 4.8 million people.
All right, I'm going to try to make the flags on our graphic fit that. So Angola twice as big as Burkina Faso, and Angola kind of in the middle of those two, and then Mauritania quite small.
Yeah.
There, how are my graphics looking?
Pretty good.
Okay. Well, listeners will be a bit baffled by what we're doing. So let's move on to part 2 of the episode, and we start with Algeria. And we did cover Algeria in 2021 African Cup. So we're just going to do a summary and a look at their recent performances here. So in terms of overall strength, Algeria is on average a second-tier team, with one period as a third-tier team and one as a top-tier team. Their weakest period was in the early years. After reaching the African Cup in 1968, they missed it 5 times in a row prior to 1980. And during that time, they were knocked out early in the rounds of the World Cup. Their strongest period came immediately after. From 1980 to 1990, they finished in the top 4 in the African Cup 5 out of 6 times. Eventually winning when they hosted it in 1990. During that period, they reached the World Cup twice in a row, actually, in 1982 and 1986. And after that, they reached the African Cup consistently, passing the group stage about half of the time. And they also came close to reaching the World Cup, falling just short. So that's the pattern of a second-tier team. One could argue a weak period from 2006 to 2012, missing 3 of 4 African Cups there. But in 2010, they both took 4th place in the African Cup as well as reaching the World Cup. So we can't really say it was a weak period. It's more accurate to see them as inconsistent from about 2006 onwards, earning their best performance with a round of 16 finish in the 2014 World Cup, which was their last appearance in that competition, as well as winning the 2019 African Cup for their second title. Although, in terms of inconsistency, that was surrounded by 2 group stage exits.
All right, moving on to their recent performances. As you said, inconsistency seems to be Algeria's defining feature over the past 10 years. Their World Cup success in 2010 and 2014 was only reflected by a slight rise in African Cup performance in 2010, but while they impressed on the world stage in 2014, they remained blasé in African Cup play. Conversely, a terrible World Cup campaign in 2018 was followed by winning the 2019 African Cup, which was itself followed by a poor showing in 2021. The 2022 World Cup campaign represents an average, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail when we go into the recent tournaments.
Yeah, but as we said at the beginning, kind of averaging out to a second-tier performances. But in the case of Algeria, the highs are a bit higher and the lows a bit lower. Let's begin that recent look with a look. I guess we start with the 2021 African Cup here.
Yeah, so Algeria enjoyed a consistent and comfortable qualification, suffering only ties in second place Zimbabwe and third place Zambia, but also beat Botswana twice to finish a distant first in their qualifying group and qualify comfortably, as we said. In the African Cup itself, this again, the most recent version, it started with a 0-0 tie with Sierra Leone, but then got worse from there, losing 1-0 to Equatorial Guinea, followed by a 3-1 loss to Ivory Coast. So they finished bottom of the group with just 1 point and did not advance.
Well, that is shocking for the defending champions, hey?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, well, the next one we look at is the Arab Cup in 2021.
Yeah, so this was held in Qatar and featured North African and Asian teams. Algeria in the group stage beat Sudan and Lebanon before tying Egypt, who they finished joint top of the group with. They were actually tied on every metric. So how Egypt took first place on fair play points, determined by yellow and red cards. So that's put
not
Algeria...
a bad decider, though. I mean, in the past, they used to replay games or toss coins and stuff like that. I think fair play is a pretty good metric.
Yes, yeah, it does mean those yellow cards should be worth something, even if infrequently. But anyways, Algeria's second place finish saw them paired up with North African neighbors Morocco. That match finished all square, but Algeria won in penalties. Algeria then beat host Qatar in the semifinal, and then in the final met their other neighbors Tunisia. That game was 0-0, but Algeria won 2-0 in extra time.
All right, so a good recovery there from 2019. And I'll just say the Arab Cup is as close as Algeria gets to a local competition. It's not local, it's actually teams from the Asian and African Confederation. But they do have, they are part of a local North African group. With teams like Tunisia and Morocco and Egypt, but they don't really have a competition, so we have no local competition to present for them. Okay, so Arab Cup in 2021, and then on to the World Cup in 2022.
Yeah, so Algeria tied 2 of their matches, both against Burkina Faso, which is interesting as they meet them in this group here. But they won their other 4, winning comfortably in each case over Djibouti and Niger. And they finished top of the group with 14 points. That put them into a playoff with Cameroon. Both teams won 1-0 on the road. Algeria actually won 1-0 in Cameroon, so had a great advantage going into the second leg. But they lost, as I said, 1-0. That sent the match to extra time. It finished 1-1, but Cameroon won, it finished 2-1 for Cameroon. They were 2-2 on aggregate, but Cameroon went through on the away goals rule. So Algeria narrowly missing out on a World Cup berth.
Yeah, actually, I don't think that's right. If they won in extra time, it wouldn't be the away goals rule, would it?
It still does come into play, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, the story being that Algeria didn't make their third World Cup. No, sorry, that wasn't their third in a row. They didn't make the World Cup there in 2022. And we move on to African Cup 2023 qualifying their next tournament.
Algeria, again, found qualification quite comfortable. They won all of their games except for their final match, which was a home draw with Tanzania. It didn't mean much to them in the end. They also beat Uganda and Niger twice. So they finished top of the group with 16 points, double the points of second place Tanzania. So again, qualified comfortably for this tournament.
All right. Well, how do you feel they're looking in their recent form?
I think their recent form looks pretty good. You know, a very poor 2021 African Cup, but winning the Arab Cup, which is a tournament a lot of teams took very seriously, you know, is a feather in their cap for sure. So, yeah, I think they come in decent form, even though they did miss out on the World Cup by a very narrow margin.
Yeah, narrow margin for sure. Yeah, my own feeling too is we did say they were kind of inconsistent from about 2006. We see a little bit of that here, but for the most part, they've been looking quite strong. All right, let's move on to our next team, Burkina Faso, and they also were in the 2021 African Cup. We'll give a link in the show notes to what we said about them there if you want a bit of a deeper dive. But in this case, we're just going to do a summary and their recent performance too. So for the summary, we kind of think in terms of strength, and Burkina Faso is a second-tier team. They've come close to reaching the World Cup in 3 of the last 4 campaigns, but they've never done it. They do have a weaker past. They usually reach the African Cup, though only after it expanded to 12 teams in 1996. They do well to pass the group stage once there, but they're quite unique in that if they do pass the group stage, they do really well. So in 1998 and in 3 of the past 5 cups, after passing the group stage, they went on to reach the semi-finals every time. Their best result there was a second place finish in 2013.
In terms of recent performance, Burkina Faso have become more consistent in recent times. World Cup campaigns are starting to match their African Cup qualifications, and they really are due to reach the World Cup, having come close in 3 campaigns from 2010 to 2018. Their failure to qualify for the 2019 African Cup, an expanded edition no less, was a disappointment, but they recovered with yet another semi-final finish in the 2021 African Cup, making it 3 of the last 5 tournaments where they reached the semi-finals. So that's quite a remarkable statistic.
Mm-hmm.
A World Cup appearance is really all that stands between them and being considered, at least in recent times, more of a top-tier team.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, apart from not passing or not reaching the cup in 2019, they have generally passed the group stage recently. Anyway, let's take a look at their recent performances in a bit more detail. So the first one we begin with is the 2019 local cup. Hang on, I can't find it here. We have to do the 20. I got to paste it in here, Connor. We got to do the 2019 local cup because actually that's the most recent one. Burkina Faso is part of the WAFU nations. That's the West African Football Union, and they have a cup, but it's been kind of inconsistent. They had one in 2019. There was one scheduled for 2021, but it never actually happened. And so 2019 remains the last version of this cup. Okay, how did they do there?
Yeah, so there's a preliminary sorting round. They tied Mauritania, who they meet here, 1-1, but won in penalties to advance to the trophy round. But that only lasted 1 game. They met neighbors Ghana, tying 1-1 as well, but this time losing in penalties to go out at the quarterfinal stage.
Right, so fairly competitive all the way, but not actually doing that well. All right, let's move on to the 2021 African Cup.
All right, so they started qualifying with a home draw with 3rd place Uganda. and tied them again away. But they were consistent, if not convincing otherwise, going undefeated and then tying in Malawi, but winning other games against South Sudan and Malawi at home. It actually was good enough to top the group. The top three were fairly close, but Burkina Faso finished first place on 12 points to qualify for the tournament.
I mean, sorry,
No.
Connor. I mean, generally in Africa, if you can win at home and tie on the road, which is not easy to do, you're doing okay. So on average, that's what they did here.
Yeah, exactly that. In the tournament, it started with a loss to host Cameroon, but they then beat Cape Verde and tied Ethiopia. But their 4 points actually gave them a second place finish in the group. From there, they met Gabon in the round of 16, who they beat on penalties. They then beat Tunisia 1-0 before losing to Senegal in the semifinal. Senegal would eventually lift the trophy. The third place match, they met Cameroon for a second time. They were winning 3-0, but Cameroon came back erased the 3-goal deficit and then won in penalties. So it was fourth place for Burkina Faso at the most recent African Cup.
Right. So once again, if they pass the group stage, they tend to get to the semi-final. That would be a tough record to keep up, though.
Yeah, definitely a quirky record, though. Maybe they're very good in those knockout or elimination games.
Yeah, well, that shootout with Gabon went to. I mean, they ended up winning 7-6 on penalties. There were 18 penalties in the game. That was just slightly more than the number of yellow cards handed out in the game, which was 15.
Oh my God.
Okay, yeah, and it was actually even more exciting than that, but maybe we got to move on. So, as I said, the local cup in 2021, the West African Nations Cup, scheduled but not played, so that tournament is a bit up in the air. And so we move on to the World Cup in 2022.
Right. So in terms of World Cup qualifying, they finished with the identical record to African Cup qualifying, which was 3 wins and 3 draws. They did tie Algeria twice, which was not bad, but really a draw at home with Niger really cost them. They ended up finishing 2 points behind Algeria, so did not advance into the playoff. So finishing second, which, as we've said, kind of confirms their recent history as being kind of close at the World Cup level, but with not enough to advance or to get there.
Yeah, that's right. For the 4th time in a row. As you say, that home draw with Niger was in the second last game, and the last game was with Algeria. It would have been a great game had they gone in tied on points. But as it was, Algeria was satisfied to get a tie, which would win them the group.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, the last thing we look at then is the qualifying for this tournament, the African Cup 2023. So how did they get here?
Yeah, it's a bit of a quirky record. They started with wins over Cape Verde, Eswatini, and Togo, but then failed to win their next 3 matches with a tie, a loss, and a tie. They still topped the group with 11 points, just one ahead of Cape Verde, but both of those teams qualified for the African Cup, top 2 finishers moving on to the tournament.
Yeah, a bit of a weak finish to come into the cup with there. And that brings us to the end of Burkina Faso, but maybe I'll just ask you your overall impression of them.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit inconsistent, but sometimes consistently good. They seem to be a good tournament team. The last qualification kind of shows that they can beat good teams, but are also a little bit vulnerable, to dropping points. And yeah, even in their last African Cup, their group stage record was a win, a loss, and a tie. But from there, they went on all the way to the 3rd, 4th place match. So A little bit hard to pin down, but not a team to be underestimated, I would say.
Yeah, well put. Well put. Okay, let's move on to Mauritania, our third team. They also reached the African Cup in 2021. So we'll just do the summary and recent performance here. And if you want the deep dive, that'll be available through a link in the show notes. Oh, and it's me. So I'll do the summary. In terms of their strength, Mauritania is a fourth-tier team for most of their history, but have recently moved up to the third tier, at least in their African Cup play. In World Cup play, they've always been knocked out in the first round, or else finished at the bottom of the table. That's basically the definition of a fourth-tier team. Finished at the bottom of the table if the first round was a group stage. But they have improved slightly. They passed a preliminary in 2018, and they earned a few more points in their 2022 World Cup group than usual, even though they nevertheless finished bottom. African Cup play, though, was stronger in general. They passed most preliminary rounds in this competition and prove a bit more competitive when it's a group stage. In 2008 and 2017, they finished second of four in their qualifying groups, though in truth they were far behind the advancing first place team. But from the expansion of the African Cup in 2019, from 16 to 24 teams, a second place finish like that means reaching the cup. So they've done well to do so. However, that seems their limit, as once they're in the cup, they tend not to do very well.
Yeah, in terms of recent performance, reaching the African Cup in 2019 and since was largely a result of the tournament expanding to 24 teams. It was foreshadowed by a good qualifying campaign in 2017, a second place finish over South Africa that would have earned passage had the top two advanced like in more recent campaigns. It certainly was an improvement in their performance, as they had only come second in a qualifying group once before. That it continued through 2019 in itself makes it more sustained than the flash in the pan it was in 2008.
All right, so a team on the rise, even if it's just a slight rise. And we look at their local cup, which is also the WAFU Nations Cup, the West African group there. And the only one we have to look at recently is in 2019, the latest edition. How did they do?
Yeah, we touched on them already because they met Burkina Faso in the sorting round, losing on penalties. Losing on penalties was also their fate in the plate round, which was a straight knockout. They lost to Gambia on penalties there. So 2 draws, but losing both in penalties and an early exit for Mauritania.
Yeah, and I think maybe earlier we should have explained the format of this competition. It's kind of interesting. It begins with being paired up with another team in a sorting round, and the winners of that round go on to the trophy round, where you win a trophy, and the losers go on to the plate round, where you just win a plate. Okay, on to the African Cup in 2021.
Yeah, so Mauritania did actually extremely well to tie group winners Morocco, home and away. Despite being bested by Burundi, that was their only loss. Beating Central African Republic twice was enough for second place in the qualifying group, which was an advancing position. In the tournament, though, they really proved no match. They lost 3 games to Gambia, Tunisia, and Mali without scoring a goal. So it was 0 points, 0 goals, and a quick exit for them in their second African Cup.
Yeah, I think Gambia would have been their only real chance at points there, and Gambia was in good form, so a tough tournament for them. Okay, so we saw that the WAFU Nations Cup was just never happened in 2021, and so their next tournament was qualification for the 2022 World Cup.
Yeah, so they didn't need a preliminary round. They were good enough for a bye there. but they did struggle in the group. They lost their first 3 to Zambia, Equatorial Guinea, and Tunisia. And then in the return fixtures, they picked up 2 points at home, impressively to Tunisia and also with Equatorial Guinea. But 2 points was all they mustered, and they finished bottom of the group, 5 points behind third place Zambia.
Right, and that's fairly typical of their World Cup record. But we did say they do a bit better in African Cup campaigns, so let's see how they did in 2023 qualifying. Well, we're talking about them here, so we do know how it turned out.
Yeah. So again, they need to finish in the top 2, which would, of course, be an improvement on their last place finish in World Cup qualifying. And of course, they did. They managed to beat Sudan twice, and also beat Gabon at home in what was really a crucial deciding game, their final match. Also during the campaign, they tied Gabon away, but then lost twice to Congo DR, who were the group winners. Their second match actually was awarded to Congo DR, a 3-0 default victory, but in the end, it didn't cost them, as they finished with 10 points, 3 ahead of Gabon, who would have been the second seed, or actually possibly the first seed. So pretty good for Mauritania to overcome them.
Yeah, definitely Gabon would have been favoured ahead of them. And, they actually did tie Congo DR at home. But as you said, the result got overturned and awarded to Congo DR. So in that light, a good battle there to take second place ahead of Gabon.
Yeah, just a bit of inconsistency there. And that awarded game was for Mauritania fielding an illegal player.
Yes, right. Okay. Well, we saw that they lost all 3 games in the previous African Cup, and not to get too much into our discussion, but do you think it'll be the same fate for them here?
I think a difference is they come in as a pot 3 team as opposed to a pot 4 team. Angola's a pot 4 team, so I guess that automatically gives them a bit of a fighting chance, and maybe we'll get back to our comparison of those teams in our discussion. But coming in a pot 3 team does give you more of a chance, I suppose, than coming in as a bottom seed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that does lead nicely into our 4th team, which is Angola, and in this case, we are going to do the full deal, because Angola is not part of the African Cup in 2021. So this is the first time we're covering them in terms of the African Cup. We did cover them in our qualification media cast for this cup, but let's begin with their participation and achievements. Do you want to take it away?
Sure. So historically, Angola are late joiners to the fray, participating in their first World Cup in 1986 and their first African Cup in 1982. They participated consistently in the World Cups, but missed 2 African Cups in 1986 and 1994 by non-entry. Their local group is COSAFA, which is the Council of Southern African Football Associations, which was formed in 1997 and consists of 14 nations. They didn't enter the first edition in 1997, as well as missing 2015 and withdrawing in 2019.
All right. Well, in terms of strength, Angola is on average a 3rd-tier team. From their start in 1980, they've always shown some competitiveness in qualifying campaigns, even if it didn't get them to the finals until 1996. But then they qualified twice in a row. However, that success was minor compared to the heights they reached in 2006. That year not only saw them reach the African Cup again, but reach the World Cup. It would be their only appearance on the grand stage, but it did initiate a strong period in regional competition. They have fallen in strength since about 2013, reaching the Cup only once when it expanded to 24 teams in 2019. Okay, and let's dive in a bit deeper into a World Cup overview. Yikes, I've lost my graphics again. there we are. And how have they done in the World Cup?
Yeah, so they went out in early rounds with kind of middling performances, meaning some results, they achieved some results at the game level, but not a campaign that really challenged the winners. 1998 was good, though, going undefeated, even if 4 of the 6 games were draws. It earned them second place, but 4 points off winners Cameroon. 2002 was similar, a 5-team grouping with the second place finish, 6 points off the leader. Those 2 campaigns foreshadowed 2006, where they won all home games and mostly tied on the road to finish first of 6 ahead of Nigeria. After that, though, it was fairly competitive campaigns in the round before the final round. 2018, however, saw them go out to South Africa in a tough round, 2 of 3. And in 2021, they finished bottom of their group, kind of returning to a middling performance and a last place finish. I will say, though, that 2006, World Cup achievement was quite something, ahead of Nigeria, and the first time they were really kind of the minnows of that World Cup. But it was a great story for a country that had spent a long time in civil war.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know if you remember, they had Manucho, I think his name was, who was on Man United's team. I'm not sure if he was on that team at this time. I think he actually may have gotten on Man United afterwards, but a couple of memorable players from that 2006 World Cup campaign.
Yeah, and they finished that with 2 draws and a loss. So didn't embarrass themselves once there, and they actually met Portugal, Angola being a Portuguese colony, so that was a bit of interest as well.
Yeah, the details are kind of interesting to look at, but we're not really focusing on the details just yet. We're still doing an overview of the African Cup before looking at the finals in detail. So their 2 strong periods are more evident and more separate in African Cup play. The first was reaching 2 African Cups in a row in 1996 and 1998. That came as a surprise because although they had been competitive at the game level, they had never come close to reaching a cup before that. That it was expanded to 16 teams in 1996 helped, especially so in 1998 when second place in the qualifying group proved enough to get them through. They were competitive at the game level in the cups too, but not enough to pass the group stage. The second strong period followed their World Cup qualification, and that consisted of 5 African Cup qualifications in a row. And this peaked by reaching the quarterfinals in both 2008 and 2010, the tournament which they actually hosted there in 2010. But they have fallen off since. They reached only the group stage in 2012 and 2013, and then failed to reach the cup in 2015 and 2017. But it seemed like the expanded version in 2019 also kind of helped them out because they reached it. And probably means fairly regular qualification for the 3rd-tier team. And they did reach that cup, but again fell at the group stage there. Okay, so in this series, we're featuring a look at the African Cup finals in detail, and maybe we'll just do the local cup overview before we get into that.
That sounds good. Yeah, so the COSAFA Cup, the Council of Southern African Football Associations, is the most vibrant local tournament in Africa. It began in 1996 when South Africa was reintroduced into FIFA, and it takes place almost every year.
Yeah, Angola. Oh, yeah. Do you want to keep going?
I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, sure. Angola didn't enter the first edition in 1997, but they did very well after that, reaching the semi-finals in the following 4 editions and winning the title in 2 of those editions. And then they won a 3rd title in 2004, but they by then were showing some signs of weakness, at least as far as this cup goes. They failed to pass the group stage in 2003, and from 2007 And if you recall, that's when their power was peaking in African Cup play. In this competition, they fell at the quarterfinal stage there in 2007. So that was their worst result over the past 4 cups. From 2015, it got even worse. They didn't pass a group stage, and that period included 3 withdrawals, either a withdrawal or a non-entry in the tournament. So in short, as far as the COSAFA Cup goes, they've declined pretty steadily from about 2006 onwards. Kind of an interesting, how do I say? It's the opposite of what happened in the African Cup.
Yeah.
Boy, I have a way with words, hey? Okay, let's go back and look at their history in the finals of African Cups. And it takes a while to get there because they didn't qualify in 1982 and 1984, didn't enter in 1986, and continued to not qualify or not enter all the way up to 1996. So do you want to take us from their performance in that tournament?
Yeah. So Angola's first place finish in African Cup qualifying actually would have gotten them to their first cup, even if it hadn't been expanded to 16 teams. But the focus here was on the finals rather than the qualifying. They were far less impressive in the cup, earning only a single draw. The competition was decidedly difficult, facing a South Africa at the peak of their strength, and Egypt and Cameroon besides that. In that light, going up 3-1 on Cameroon was a good result, but they allowed 2 goals, giving up a 3-3 draw on an own goal in the 90th minute, and that would be their only point.
All right, well, that was 1996. In 1998, they were grouped with local rivals, South Africa and Namibia, and they did well to tie a still strong South Africa. They also tied Namibia 3-3. In this case, it was they who came back from 2 goals down in an uncanny resemblance to that Cameroon game that Connor just described. And in the third game, it was a 5-2 loss to Ivory Coast, and that prevented them again from passing the group stage.
After 1998, it took until 2006 to reach the Cup again. And in fact, it was a stunning World Cup qualification campaign that year that earned them entry, as qualification was based on World Cup qualifying results. They opened with a loss to Cameroon and a tie with Congo DR and a win over Togo, who had also reached the upcoming World Cup, was unfortunately for them not enough to advance. They were tied on points with Congo DR, but a goal behind on goal difference, so went out at the group stage.
Yeah, and I remember they were quite disappointed by that because this tournament was in January, was supposed to be kind of a build-up to the World Cup, so it was a bit of a confidence blow going into the World Cup. But as we saw in the overview, this was the start of a strong period for them, and in 2008 they went undefeated in the group stage, a win over Senegal and ties over South Africa, who they seem to meet every time, it seems. South Africa and Tunisia saw them through to a second place finish. And they lost to eventual tournament winners, Egypt, in the following round, the quarterfinals there.
Yeah, and 2010 was much the same. It was a win in the middle game over Malawi, that was sandwiched by draws with Mali and Algeria. But this time it was enough to top the group. They lost to Ghana in the quarterfinals, though, unlucky to once again meet a finalist at this stage.
All right, well, in 2012, they made it to the tournament too. And sorry, I got to fix up the graphics a bit here. They made it to the tournament, and they began with an opening win over Burkina Faso. They tied Sudan in the second, so it looked good for them to go through. But just as in 1998, Ivory Coast beat them in the third game and prevented their advancement. So as in 2006, they finished tied with the second place team, but 1 goal behind on goal difference.
2013 will be the last in their string of 5 consecutive Cup appearances. It also showed their growing weakness because after a draw in their opener with Morocco, they lost to South Africa and Cape Verde to finish last in the group.
Right, and it would take until 2019 and an expanded tournament to 24 teams to see them back in the cup again. And oh no, that's not one we're looking closely at, so I'll summarize it here. As in 1998, they tied the first two games here against Tunisia and Mauritania, who they meet in this cup. And even a draw with Mali would have seen them through in the third game, but they lost that game by a single goal. Okay, so that is the history of Angola in the finals, and now we turn to look at their recent history. As there have been 4 COSAFA Cups since, so we'll just summarize all of them until the most recent one. In 2019, they withdrew from the COSAFA Cup, and so the next tournament was the African Cup in 2021.
Yeah. So it was a disappointing campaign, finishing last in their qualifying group. They came in as the 3rd seed with the chance of reaching the cup, but managed only a away tie in Congo DR, who finished 3rd above them, and a meaningless home win in their final game against Gabon. They lost twice to surprise 4th seed Gambia, who upset everyone and finished 1st in the group.
Yeah, Gambia is kind of an interesting team. Next we have 2 local cups. Oh, sorry, just the one in 2021, and actually they didn't enter that local cup, so their next tournament was World Cup 2022 qualifying.
So Angola were among the bottom 28 teams required to play around 1 of 3 playoff, effectively a knockout round. And there they comfortably won over Gambia. Ironic considering Gambia topped the group in their most recent African Cup campaign, but they won both home and away to put them into the group stage. There, though, they again proved a little out of their depth. They did beat Gabon 3-1 at home, and otherwise managed an impressive tie at home to Egypt and a tie with Libya. But their other games were all losses, and their 5 points, well, not terrible, saw them finish last in the group.
Yeah, they took points off every team there, but not enough to get out of last place. Okay, well, there are 2 more COSAFA Cups. The one in 2022, and all of these tournaments take place in South Africa, by the way. So 2022, they were knocked out in the group stage. The most recent one was in 2023. We'll take a bit of a closer look at that one.
Yeah. So there's no seed round here, just a group stage with the winners advancing. Angola tied Mozambique, lost to Mauritius, and then beat Lesotho. But their 1-1-1 record saw them finish 2nd in the group behind Lesotho. So had they actually managed to win or tie that game, they would have finished 1st in the group, but as it was 2nd and did not advance.
Yeah, so that the reason why we do this actually is to give a little peek at the local level. So you can see generally weak teams in the COSAFA region. A few good teams, South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe. But generally they should be winning a group like this, I would say. Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's, not always our team sending their best players, but yeah, when you look at the footballing heritages of the teams in the group too, Angola definitely kind of seemed the big fish in the pond.
Yeah, I mean, it was an impressive performance by Lesotho, who are usually a pretty weak team. Anyway, let's move on to their most recent campaign, which is the qualifying for this African Cup. And how did they get here?
They got here on the strength of a couple of ties, actually. They beat Central African Republic twice, tied Madagascar twice, and then also managed a tie at home with Ghana. They lost on the road. So their 9 points saw them 2nd in the group behind Ghana, the top 2 advancing, and 2 points ahead of Central African Republic, who, as I said, they beat twice. Probably not the most difficult of groups, but still an impressive performance to finish second above the other teams.
Yeah, but as we said, the cup with 24 teams now kind of allowing third tier teams into the competition, and they do sometimes do surprisingly well. It actually is interesting. Madagascar had a great tournament there a couple of times ago. We saw Gambia doing very well. So it's kind of interesting to have these smaller teams making the cup. Anyway, that brings us to the end of part 2, the history section. And now we go to part 3, where we compare the teams and discuss them. So we begin with the pots that they come from, and then their rankings.
Yeah. So we'll look at the teams and kind of where they ranked in those pots. So Algeria were actually the second weakest team in pot 1. That's kind of excluding the host Ivory Coast, who actually are ranked higher than. Burkina Faso were kind of from the middle of pot 2. They were 4th of 6 of the pot 2 ranked teams. Mauritania just made it into pot 3. They're the weakest of the teams there, a pot which also includes South Africa, Cape Verde, Guinea, Zambia, and Equatorial Guinea. And then finally, Angola were the third lowest ranked team in the tournament, ahead of Gambia, who they beat in their World Cup playoff, and Tanzania. So really, when you look at all these teams, they all come from the bottom of their pot. So in terms of relative strength, that perhaps shows a slightly weaker group overall.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, let's move on to talk about their rankings. We look at 2 systems here, the FIFA and the ELO rankings.
Yeah. So beginning with Algeria, the pot 1 team, they are 34th in FIFA and 38th in ELO. It's kind of hard to track them. They've been quite up and down. We mentioned they were quite an inconsistent team. In the last 10 years, they've been as high as 18th and as low as 68th in FIFA.
Wow.
So no real trend other than to say they're an up and down team.
Yeah, and they'd never reached 18th in the more stable ELO system, but they were 82nd in ELO in June 2018, now up to 38th. So that inconsistency kind of showing in both systems.
All right, next is Burkina Faso. They were 58th in FIFA and 69th in ELO. This is at the time of the draw. They've had some upward improvement, especially if you look over the last 10 years, where they've been, they've had some really good African Cups tournaments in that time. So they haven't gone kind of much higher than they are now. A couple of times they've broken into the top 50 in FIFA, but 55th to 6th and 67th, kind of a 58th, sorry, and 69th, a bit of a long-term average.
Yeah, a bit more even than Algeria there.
Mm-hmm. Mauritania are 99th in both systems. They've actually historically have been below 100. 10 years ago, they were 174th and 165th. So breaking the top 100, albeit barely, in both systems kind of tracks a steady upward trend for Mauritania.
Yeah, well, reaching the African Cup certainly helped to improve their rank, but they seem to be just on the verge of breaking 100, just breaking it. Now we'll see if they can keep that up. And
then Angola, the pot 4 team, they're just below 100, 117th in FIFA and 111th in ELO. It's a bit of a recent rise for them, but just 5 years ago, they were 137th and 143rd. So they've risen a little bit from that time, but haven't cracked the top 100 yet.
Yeah, they are coming out of a kind of probably the weakest period in their history, at least their recent history. So we'll talk about that a bit more when we get to the discussion. Let's move on to the head-to-head records, and we maybe you can take us through the actual record, and I'll point out any interesting details.
Yeah, so Algeria and Burkina Faso met a number of times and have a relatively even record. Algeria has 5 wins, they've 4 ties, and Burkina Faso 3 wins.
Yeah, and actually Algeria's good record there was more earned in the past. In recent times, in the 2014 World Cup qualifying, they exchanged home wins, and in 2022 World Cup qualifying exchanged ties. So that's pretty interesting coming into this tournament.
Hmm. Algeria versus Mauritania, they've met less frequently, just twice, in fact, and this was quite a while ago. But Algeria have bested Mauritania, so they have a win and a draw.
Yeah, that was back in 1986, so probably not that relevant now, but Mauritania has taken points off them at least.
Yeah, next we have Algeria and Angola. This one a bit more even than you might expect. Algeria with 2 wins, they have 4 draws, and Angola have 1 win.
Yeah, the last time they met was in the 2010 African Cup group stage. That was actually hosted by Angola, and the two tied a scoreless tie there. That was the last time they met in major competition.
Yeah, tie being the most common result for them.
Yeah.
Burkina Faso and Mauritania. Burkina Faso has the edge. They've won 4, tied 3, and just lost once.
Yeah, that one a bit surprising too, closer than I expected. In the 2019 African Cup qualifying, they each won at home there. That was their most recent meeting.
Burkina Faso and Angola have an even record. It's 3 wins apiece and 1 draw.
Yeah, and even in 2019, in that same qualifying round, they exchanged home wins too. So that one holding true to being even.
And then Mauritania and Angola have met 3 times, and it's a 1-1-1 record.
Yeah, and all 3 of those times were in 2019, twice in the qualifying campaign where they too exchanged home wins. And then in the group stage, they met and tied 0-0.
Yeah, so actually overall, some fairly even records. It's not, I mean, Algeria has the best record overall, but more even in terms of individual matchups than we see in a lot of groups.
I mean, absolutely, and at the very least, maybe a bit of confidence for the weaker teams in the group that they can take points. And maybe not a bad point, a bad place to start the discussion here. Do you see, maybe that's too detailed. Well, let's say, do you see any of the weaker teams, Mauritania and Angola, actually challenging the top 2 teams here?
You know what? I have to say, I think the world rankings are actually a good guide. There's no kind of real discrepancy. I think Algeria, are the strongest team. Burkina Faso, the clear second, and I think the closest matchup is between the 2 bottom teams, Mauritania and Angola, which, as I said, is reflected in the ranking. So, some possibilities potentially for points, especially because both teams have been inconsistent. Algeria have shown that inconsistency and had a very poor tournament last time. And Burkina Faso seemed to do really well, or else not that well at all. So that leaves open some possibilities, but I think their best chance of points is certainly from the game among themselves.
Yeah, I mean, we did see Algeria finish bottom of the group in 2021, and sometimes they just absolutely fail to show up. So I think a lot rides on that. They could easily dominate this group, or they could struggle even with those teams below. So it depends kind of which version of them arrives at the cup. Would it be the championship winning version of 2019, or the last place in the group stage version of 2021?
Yeah, I will note with Algeria that the most recent meeting with each of the 3 other teams were all ties. They tied Angola, they tied Mauritania, they tied Burkina Faso the last time they met. So that opens the door a little bit and shows that Algeria doesn't kind of consistently dominate these teams, even in recent times.
Yeah, certainly not unassailable, but I kind of agree with you. I wouldn't predict an upset here. Again, it kind of depends what form we see them in. Do you see them necessarily finishing first over Burkina Faso, or do you think there's a chance of an upset there?
I say an outside chance. I think Algeria, I mean, we do have talked about their inconsistency, but overall, I probably have to say they're trending in the right direction. They were very, very close to the last World Cup. And I think that the 2021 Arab Cup championship actually, is quite an impressive achievement. There are a lot of good teams competing there, and they beat some good teams on the way to the final. So I think Algeria are perhaps showing a little bit more of their potential. They have a lot of good players, so they are my pick to win the group.
Yeah, I gotta say I agree with you there. Burkina Faso, though, I mean, if they are at their best, we can see them go. We've seen them go quite far in tournaments. I think it was 3 of the last 4 or 3 of the last 5 where they reached the semi-finals. Do you remember?
Yeah, 3 of the last 5. And on their day, they're very good, and they've beaten good teams. So that'll be quite an interesting matchup, especially if Algeria, maybe starts the tournament a little bit slow. Certainly, I think Algeria will get out of the group. But, yeah, I think it's still an open question if Burkina Faso can overtake them. And, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily predict it, but I certainly wouldn't be shocked if Burkina Faso, does well in that game against Algeria.
Yeah. Now we have seen some weaker teams do well, kind of rise to the occasion of the cup. Mauritania got 2 draws in 2019, but lost all 3 in 2021. I kind of see them at the bottom of this group, I gotta say. Even though Angola is the pot 4 team, I think their qualification for this cup pretty much brought them out of their weakest period in their history. And I think historically, or kind of on average, they're a stronger team than Mauritania. Do you have any problem with me picking them as the 3rd place team here?
I don't, and I think we talked about Mauritania. They were the lowest seed in pot 3, so they really are, I think, kind of a pot 4 team. And I think compared to some of the other teams who I highlighted, I think Mauritania, is a fair bit weaker than, say, Guinea or Equatorial Guinea, who are in the same pot. So I see them more as a pot 4 team, and I think their performances so far at African Cups, where they have finished bottom of the group, kind of emphasizes that. Angola, they weren't there last time, so we don't have that most recent tournament to go on. But I agree. They are trending in more of the right direction. I honestly see it as quite competitive between those 2 teams. I see them kind of both pot 4-ish.
Yeah. Okay, well, I see you dodging quite a bit, but I'm going to pin you down here. We got to be honest here, Connor, and it's time to kind of lay out who you think or how you think this group is going to finish.
All right. I'm going to go Algeria first and Burkina Faso second. I certainly don't see Mauritania or Angola threatening the top 2. Possibly not even taking a point in those games. I see that bit of a gulf there. I will pick Mauritania as a pot 3 team to finish 3rd. They've shown they beat Gabon in qualifying for this, and had some good results against Congo DR too. So I think they can show it a little bit more. Angola a little bit more unknown, perhaps, given their absence. So I'm going to say Mauritania 3rd, Angola 4th.
Well, that's very interesting. We generally divide the podcast into, me being kind of the more history-oriented guy and Connor giving a lot of the information on the recent information. And I see a bit of a recency bias and my historical bias coming through with picking Angola as a generally stronger team. So I'm going to say my logical brain says Algeria and Burkina Faso, but I like Burkina Faso and I do think they can get the better. I just have the feeling that Algeria is not going to be at their best this cup. So I'm going to be bold and say Burkina Faso, Algeria, Angola and Mauritania.
All right. Do you see either Mauritania or Angola rising to the level of 2nd place?
I think it's possible. I don't know why I have a good feeling about Angola, but I think we've seen that Algeria and Burkina Faso can both be inconsistent. So I wouldn't go to the point of actually predicting it, but I do think it's more possible than you seem to think it is.
All right.
All right. Well, I regret in the previous podcast we've done that we didn't do what I'm about to do now, which is to say, I guess we both kind of agree that Algeria and Burkina Faso will be the teams that advance. But how far do you think they will advance? Do you see any of these teams maybe reaching the final, the semi-final?
I think semifinal is possible, I guess, for both teams, considering Burkina Faso have been there and done that. I think Algeria could go on a run. I think this is a group that they're well capable of winning and perhaps getting a couple favorable draws as a result of that later on. So I see Algeria as a team that could get to the semifinals, but probably not into the final. Burkina Faso I see a bit more as a quarterfinal team. But really, whether they win a knockout game kind of depends a little bit on who they get, I think.
Yeah. Again, my kind of historical perspective is seeing kind of both of them as quarterfinal teams. I mean, it's ironic that we both say that because Burkina Faso have never been knocked out in the quarterfinals. Once they've gotten past the group stage, they always seem to get further. But I'm wondering how long that can last. Now there's a round of 16 also that they have to get past. So I think it'll be a bit more difficult going forward. I agree with you that both of these teams could do it if they come in good form and maybe get some good draws. But I don't see either of these teams really as semi-finalist teams. Perhaps Algeria, but even I think winning the cup in 2019 was a bit of an outperformance. So I'm going to say kind of quarterfinals. I don't think either of them are going to make it to the semi-finals.
All right.
That all sounds a bit negative, doesn't it?
Well, we did say it was perhaps a weaker group overall, but on the other hand, I think it's an opportunity. I think, if Algeria or Burkina Faso, whoever wins the group, they have the potential to get off to a good start in this tournament, and maybe that itself will carry one of these teams a little bit further than might otherwise be expected.
I agree. I certainly wouldn't be surprised to see either of them reach the semifinals or do well. So great. How about a third place team going through?
I don't see it in this group. I see it more in groups where there's a bit of parity, and I don't really see it in this group. So, yeah, I mean, maybe a team only needs one win. It's possible, but that also might depend on keeping goal difference down. And again, this is a group where I think the third and fourth pot teams are relatively weaker, so I don't really see it, but possible, of course.
Yeah. I'm kind of inclined to agree with you. I just kind of have a bit of a good feeling about Angola this tournament. So again, being a bit bold, I'm going to say that they will make it through to the round of 16.
All right.
Well, that brings us to the end of Group D, and stay tuned. We'll be on to Group E next.
You bet. I'll see you then.
We originally planned to tag on our past, present, and future plans for the mediacast, but we have instead decided to put a link to that 10-minute video in the show notes. It covers what we're working on and what we plan to do over the next 9 months. We would like to thank Pixabay and Alexei Ivanov of Mappa Music for the wonderful background music accompanying this mediacast.